One.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And today is the anniversary of the hostage crisis in 1979 in Iran, as Iran was going through some serious changes for the worst. We are going to talk about what the hostage situation was about, what it all means, what America's response was and should have been, et cetera, et cetera. And I am here with a guy who, well, he's a successful hedge fund manager because he understands that it's not about money. It's about ideas. It's Jonathan Hoenig.
Thank you, Rucka. Great to be with you on a historical topic, but on a topic that's also so relevant today, and on one in which Ms. Rand and then subsequently Dr. Peikoff and then subsequently other objectivist scholars, Dr. Brooke among them, have had so much to say. So it's an interesting kind of intersection of ideas and politics and philosophy all in one very timely topic.
Absolutely right. So now Iran had a dictator installed by the U.S., certainly a controversial move by the U.S. in the 1950s. But this dictator was friendly to American and European property protection in that region, mostly, I understand, having to do with oil. So already you can hear the Marxists saying like, oh, of course, those oil companies, are corrupt. And, of course, the people deserve that oil. Well, the ideal would have been Iran being a rights-respecting civilization where an American company who discovers oil there has his property protected. But unfortunately, that was not the case. Still, America could have handled things much better in the decades leading up to 1979. But nonetheless, okay, 1979 comes around. The revolutionaries, the people kidnap. They basically take hostage. How many people do you recall? Or do you have it in front of you? Over 100?
I believe it was hundreds. They probably dribbled them out for a little bit. But, Rucka, to your point, it's hard for people to imagine now that there was a time before political Islam was such a major dominant part of what we know to be Iranian culture. We all of us, growing up in the 80s and 90s and 2000s now, we just associate Iran with the Ayatollah Khomeini, with a very repressive, authoritarian Islamist culture. So it's hard to imagine now that there was a time before that. And the Iranian Revolution, as you said, I think what for many Americans was the kind of wake-up call as to just exactly what political Islam and what this looming threat was. And, Ms. Rand, if I can share the quote, Ms. Rand, at the time the hostages were taken, as I said, hundreds of Americans, was asked, what should be the U.S. policy in the Iranian crisis? How should we get the hostages back? This is in that great Donahue interview. It's available to anyone. We definitely want to check that out. Her response was, quote, never allow the country to get into that situation. It's certainly the fault of our foreign policy. And at present, there's no right course of action. It's too late. If we didn't march with force the first or second day after the hostages were taken, nothing we do after that will be of any good, and it will take us years to live down. So think about it. That was in 1979. I don't use the term prophetic in a mystical way, but how knowing she was of, to her point, we're still living down that appeasement in 1979 with the Islamic world today.
Absolutely. So one effect that it had on history is that it showed people you can mess with the U.S. You can absolutely kick America in the balls. And America's response will probably be sloppy, trepidatious. They're probably going to pay one group of terrorists to help them fight another group. I mean, they're just incoherent, pragmatists, short-sighted, and have tunnel vision. The U.S., that is, I'm sorry to say. Another thing it showed the world, and this is even worse, it showed the world that Islam can be powerful. It can take political control, and Islam will reign supreme. Now, to buy some time, a lot of different Muslim sects hate one another and are going to fight each other every step of the way. So even if, quote, Islam takes over, these Muslims over here might want power while those Muslims over there disagree. And, they're buying a little bit. They're slowing down the takeover a little bit. But it definitely showed people, look at Iran. They said it was a somewhat secular dictatorship. and became the theocracy of theocracies that inspired the bin Ladens of the world, inspired the Palestinians to turn away from, secular nationalism like they somewhat were before and become, suicide bombing martyrs for Allah. And the examples go on and on. Other regions in the Middle East became theocratic that had previously been basically secular. It's certainly tragic, and all because America just wouldn't stand up to a pipsqueak group of thugs in Persia.
I think I love that you're emphasizing that, pipsqueak, not just even in size, Rucka, obviously, size of these countries then and now relative to the U.S., but in stature. I mean, if you listen to Miss Rand so often, what she writes about, and thank you to Marilyn for a great contribution for $4. Thank you to Gail, who says she rarely gets to watch live. Big thank you. We thank you, Gail, for that. But the sanction of the victim, and in that appeasement, we put, in my opinion, these Middle East pipsqueak countries. I say, they're backward countries. We've talked a lot about that, even to this day, places that don't even respect basic individual rights, like the right of women to drive, for example. You put them on the same playing field. You legitimize them as a right-respecting country like the U.S. or like the U.K. You say, well, we're all equal. And I don't know if that's egalitarianism, but we embolden our enemies. And we have, certainly going back to the late 1970s. And, Dr. Peikoff, to his great credit, he was on it once again. Those who don't know, Dr. Leonard Peikoff is Ayn Rand's intellectual heir. He's a scholar and a professor in his own right, has tremendous teachings. And less than a month after the 9/11 attacks, he and the Ayn Rand Institute published a seminal essay, End States Who Sponsor Terrorism, basically saying, in my words now, these are not legitimate states that sponsor and engage in this type of unbelievably atrocious rights violation. They don't have a right to even live. And I believe Dr. Peikoff echoed Ms. Rand's Donahue interview, and he said, quoting now, when should we act if not now? And of course, he's talking after 9/11. If our appeasement has led to an escalation of disasters in the past, can it do otherwise in the future? Do we wait until our enemies master nuclear, chemical, and biological warfare? There is still time to demonstrate we'll take war against terrorism seriously as a sacred obligation to our founding fathers, to every victim of the men who hate this country, and to ourselves. There is still time to make the world understand that we will take up arms anywhere and on principle to secure America's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So even he says it there, Rucka, you need to threaten and say, we are going to go after people who go after Americans. We didn't do it in 79 per Miss Rand, and we didn't do it in 2001 per Dr. P.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of people wrongly think that like George W. Bush and the Republicans are like real hawks and like real tough and real, really into self-defense. And that failed, of course. It just created a big mess. And the best thing America could do is just build a wall around America, and every other country can just close their borders as well and be, homogenous and live in stagnation. That's what the populist right has basically come up with as a response to the Islamic threat. And it's amazing the power of philosophy. We see every step of the way. So like multiculturalism, right? We can't judge a different culture. It's just their culture. So we can't judge people threatening our lives and liberty and property over there or anywhere. We can't judge them. Also, if selfishness is evil, as prevailing philosophy says it is, if selfishness is evil, then who are we as a powerful, rich country to assert ourselves against, a weaker, idealistic group of fighters, taking our boys and girl and ladies hostage, right? It's like we see philosophy. Also, pragmatism says, don't be principled, right? American education says, no, don't think too far ahead and don't think in principles. Principles are fake. It's all just mumbo jumbo philosophy, detached from reality. Just solve problems, quote unquote. Just solve the problem right now. Okay, they're taking our people hostage. Don't be principled. Don't think about the job of the U.S. government in ideologically. Just be very, very short range. Just try to negotiate. Try to give them what they want, and just try to treat them with kid gloves and maybe pay a group of Sunnis to attack these Shiites over here and vice versa, and try to buy some time that way.
And I'll just throw this in here too, and link it back to some modern day stories. Whatever you think of Brittany Griner, the basketball player who was, incarcerated for months and months because of a tiny bit of, and then it underwent a prisoner swap. You know, the U.S. engaged in a prisoner swap. We gave up some kind of a terrible arms dealer and engaged. So this is my editorialization here, Ruck. You know, that dealing with terrorist countries, that kind of legitimizing of them, of doing deals with them, you know, instead of denouncing them and breaking off negotiations, in my opinion, altogether, is that, are we only doing about what Ms. Rand and Dr. Peikoff said? We're kind of legitimizing these, you know, horrible, horrible places by engaging with them at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but for Ayn Rand, we would be living in, you know, on Planet of the Apes, in effect, like wondering how is everybody so delusional and irrational. Ayn Rand pointed out the horror that of the theater of the absurd that is the United Nations. To have the USA diplomat sitting next to the USSR's diplomat, the freest country next to the biggest butcher in world history, at least at that point, to that day. Maybe China gave them a run for their money, depending if you count starving people to death as the same as killing them with your own hands. That's maybe, you know, maybe up for debate. But yeah, I mean, to have China, USSR, and the USA, and, you know, and every other dictatorship and every other semi-free country and freer country all sitting in the same room with an equal vote, with equal stature, with equal status, and an equal level of respect, and all, shows you the consequence of trying to dodge philosophy, of trying to dodge engaging with reality and thinking in rational principles. And we end up in a state where the most free countries are punished the most in the UN. They're condemned the most, and the biggest dictators and the biggest butchers, they're often put in charge of the Human Rights Watch Commission, this and that. Women's rights is presided over by like Saudi Arabia, and, you know, the anti-terrorist, you know, section of the UN. I think Gaddafi in Libya had a high station. He was in a high station in that department. I mean, it's the theater of the absurd. Like you couldn't sell this as a silly story to children if it weren't actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, and it's always, in my opinion, when it comes to foreign policy, there's always a straw man that engages. People say, well, you know, what do you just want to do, bomb everyone? But, you know, again, this is my understanding, but it's the idea of the sanction of the victim, of just even considering, you know, in my opinion, all of the Middle East is a cesspool ex-Israel. I mean, these are countries that don't forget free markets, like basic individual rights of mobility and worship and the sexuality. You know, so to me, it's a complete cesspool. But, you know, the bully pulpit of the American sort of presidency, but even the American political world, you know, in my opinion, Rucka, it legitimizes these countries. It says, as you said, oh, you know, Saudi Arabia is just like anywhere else, just like any place else. Qatar, oh yeah, just like any place else. When, you know, it's not. These, in my opinion, are still butchers to this day. And why anyone would want to legitimize them on any level, to your point, I think it's absurd.
It is absurd. And there's so much power in simple immoral statements. So America doesn't need to go around policing the world and protecting every semi-free country from every dictatorship. Typically, dictatorships, they starve themselves. They eat themselves from within. They're cannibalistic. Obviously, they're parasitic. They need to invade their neighbor in order to subsist. But if they don't do that, they're typically pulling guns on each other and blowing their own heads off within dictatorships. We've seen through the 20th century, dictatorships survive by charity. America subsidized the Soviet Union. I guess that's an act of altruism. I guess that's supposed to be maybe logistically wise, like, oh, we'll give them some food so their people aren't starving, and maybe they'll see that communism is not the way. I don't know what the thought was there. Same with North Korea. Every time North Korea runs out of food, America and similar countries, or maybe just America, would send them money and say, all we ask in return is that you not build a nuclear bomb. Well, guess what? They got the food, and Kim Jong ate most of it, and they built a bomb.
It's so true. I mean, they played Clinton for a tea with that, right? I mean, they just played him for hundreds of millions of dollars of aid. We appeased that evil, and you got decades more of this dictator in charge.
Yeah, so if we simply stop feeding the beast and maybe issue just a moral statement, like we recognize that South Korea is a basically free country and North Korea sucks, And to the extent North Korea is threatening us, we will not allow any of our citizens to do business with them, as if if that money is going to go towards hurting us. Just a statement like that weakens someone like Kim Jong. But meeting with Kim Jong, treating him like a respectable leader, treating the Saudis like they're respectable, treating the Iranians like they're respectable, Yasser Arafat and his, contemporaries. These people have so much innocent blood on their hands, and they wish to, oppress so many more people. To treat these people like they're anything but trash is, again, it's absurd. You couldn't make this stuff up. And thank you, Wes, for $20. He says, happy to see us both on the show.
And one of Miss Rand's great lines, and there's so many, is judge and prepare to be judged. And it's such an opposite from even some of the libertarians, right? Are like, hey, who am I to judge? Do whatever you want. Objectivism, in my opinion, is just the opposite of that. So I love that thing of Miss Rand of, judge and prepare to be judged. And I've done plenty of shows about my interpretations of the Middle East, of what goes on there. And, to your point, instead of dancing with the sheiks, instead of, giving a pass on what's happening in the Middle East, instead of dealing with Russia in terms of engaging in these prisoner swaps, we're still having this happen. Rucka, what would you think happened if some Middle Eastern country took you hostage? And God knows you've given them plenty of reason to do so. You're going to sweat out in some prison before they come pick you up. Could be years or never.
I would only have to pray that there are elements within those countries that are sympathetic to me and coming to rescue their hero. But no, I would use whatever platform I have when I do get out to say, here's what the government of America should have done, and here's what's wrong with how they handle this. And I would probably spend the rest of my life, with some lucrative book deals. Hopefully, I know the truth is not as sexy as these type of conspiracy trash that other enemies of, Islam are, indulge in. But I would be one of the voices that people want to hear. And I would have a statement to make. But yeah, while I'm locked up in, in the Iranian torture chamber, it's, I would have to maybe rediscover religion and just, turn to the mystical dimension to get me through.
I'll say one that comes to mind. Dr. Brooke has mentioned this. Why is it, I believe, that we still even have an embassy in Moscow? Like, why is there any foot of, quote, American soil in Russia right now? Why do we legitimize these places, even by having an American embassy? And even that might be a great move, in my opinion, to kind of start to say, no, we're going to distance ourselves from this country. Not going to go to war with them, but, say that we're not going to deal with them, and recommend that our citizens don't do business with them and don't travel to them, because they really, truly are a hostile area. You got to feel like a real target in Russia now, going there, knowing that they can swipe you off the, ground and say, well, Biden or Trump or DeSantis are going to pay a good bounty for Rucka Ali.
Yeah. The question of how America should deal with hostile countries by assessing like how hostile they are and recommending people travel over there or do business over there is an interesting one. But certainly if a country is brutally, brutal with their people and brutally invading other countries and brutally threatening free countries like America and England and so on, there's no reason to have a diplomatic, embassy in those countries. I would definitely take the embassies out of those countries, and that is a very, very light punishment for their behavior, of course.
Well, we started talking about the Iranian hostage crisis and the response. We brought two examples of how Ms. Rand kind of put forth, and it's sure that when you appease evil, it grows. They only have the energy. This is my opinion. They only have the energy. They only have the sustenance that we give them, and how these pipsqueak countries, that was your word, have been allowed to grow 30, 40 years on now because they've been legitimized. They've been given food and aid of every turn. And that's why they are the threats. Iran didn't have a bomb, even the threat potential for a bomb back in 1979. And it's only all that legitimacy and appeasement over the years that have made that a nuclear threat, that will make it a nuclear threat. And our ideas, in my opinion, haven't changed. They've only gotten worse.
Yeah, it's been over 40 years, actually, right? We're 2023 now, so it's been like 40 some years. It's
How's that
absolutely.
possible if I'm still 29?
That's a good question. I'm struggling with that one myself. I guess same way your hedge fund management relies on understanding that it's not about money, it's about ideas. Yeah, it's absolutely disgraceful and pathetic. And again, it shows you the power of philosophy. And America's foreign policy is a demonstrable case study in the impact of philosophy. The same way it impacts an individual person and ends up resulting in all types of psychological states and choices being made in those states. You see the American government and specifically the foreign policy of America and other European, free countries, Western countries. You see a combination of just short-range pragmatism and altruism, like, oh, we don't want to be too assertive, we don't want to defend ourselves, and also we don't want to be too harsh with these weaklings. I mean, it's basically like saying, like, oh, like England sees Germany purging Europe. England should not, do anything to Germany, right? Because I don't know, because who are they to judge, right? It's like you can't judge the people trying to threaten you. You can't judge the people threatening your own rights. You can't judge the people who want to take over the world and oppress everybody. That just shows you how impactful philosophy is. It shows people acting in ways that, again, a science fiction writer could not have invented.
I mean, remember what George Bush said in the aftermath of 9/11? Like, what I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, "Oh, Islam means peace," right? Wasn't that quote? Like, what are you talking about? Islam means peace. Pretty much appeasement, in my opinion. And then just a couple of years ago, I thought Trump meeting the North Korean dictator was one of the most unbelievably awful things I've seen politically in my lifetime, and did nothing but, again, appease the evil, giving the evil more sustenance. Marilyn says, if we can make it clear going forward that if you continue to travel countries like Russia and get jailed, we can't help you. No more deals like for Miss Griner. I certainly appreciate that. And Justin wants to know, thank you, Justin, as well, your thoughts, Rucka, on Steven Crowder versus the Daily Wire.
While the Daily Wire is no favorite of mine, it is clear that they are the rational actor within their context of, limited a grasp of reality, compared to Steven Crowder, who has spent so many years now twisting reality and plucking tiny little bits, semi-facts and bits of evidence and turning them into a narrative, painting a picture for his stupid audience to eat up. He's been doing that for so long, he believes it himself and is now turning on big conservative media. Big Con, he calls them. He registered the website like fightbigcon.com, something like that, months ago. And he's been hinting for months now, Crowder. He's been saying, like when Kanye West first started talking about the Jews, Crowder said, look, we can talk about, secular Jews in Hollywood with Jewish last names who are giving out bad contracts. And by the way, that happens in the conservative movement all the time. That was Crowder's insight when Kanye West started going on his tangent. Crowder's been he's been going down the rabbit hole for a while, and now the conservatives are turning cannibalistic, as you can see. That when you sell your soul to the devil, when you start indulging in conspiracy quack shit, it's only a matter of time before you're tagged, and now there's a narrative about you being the big tech arm. The same way that big tech is an arm of the government. Now, guess what, Daily Wire? Now you are an arm of big tech, and that would make Steven Crowder what? The penis? Excuse me. This is not the place for that type of imagery. Thank you for joining us today. Really, thank you for the super chats. And I think we covered just about everything, Jonathan. I mean, within a reasonable expectation. And please leave a super thanks on YouTube and hit the join button to become a member, help the network. God, we're showing you ideas are everything. Even Jonathan's hedge fund management is informed by ideas. Without philosophy, we're in trouble. And unless you want to see us all turn into Steven Crowder, please support the network.
And read, and I'll throw this out on the way out, and read Ayn Rand. That's our point here, hopefully encouraging you to engage with our discussion. But the irony is people like Steven Crowder, people like, in my opinion, Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro. They're so non-radical. They're so fucking boring, aren't they, Rucka? They're so non-revolutionary. Only Ayn Rand is the revolutionary radical voice that can change not only the conservative movement, but people who profess to love freedom. They all say they love freedom. None of them have the intellectual or philosophical means to do so. Only Ayn Rand does. That's why we're promoting her. That's why you're here. And so take this opportunity to put her in your reading list and join us same time Monday as well.
Yes, it is amazing how much Ayn Rand was able to accomplish intellectually, and how much she was able to create simply by being selfish and by really caring about stuff, being selfish. Coming up, not today, we've got nothing at all. Coming up this weekend, though, tomorrow on Saturday at 6 p.m. UK time, it's Week in Short, a compilation of short clips from this week. Let's hope we made it, Jonathan. Oh, we had some moments here today. Then at 3:30 p.m. UK time, it's the Objective Communication Study Group with James Valiant, open to ARCUK members, and the session will also be live streamed to YouTube members. All right, Jonathan, let's not travel to Iran.
James Valiant, brilliant guy, studied with Dr. Peikoff. He's available for just a couple pence in our coffers to help keep the programming going. So thanks for all of our members who make that possible.
Send your dollars and cents and pence to avoid President Mike Pence. And with that, have a wonderful weekend and goodbye.